And good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Online at bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. Along with former Wausau West High School head football coach Jason Foster, and I should mention former Northern Pines head coach as well. It all counts, and you had some, and you always talk about you had some really good players, including one that made it to Wisconsin. What was the name again?
Austin Ramish.
Yes, Ramish. And but unfortunately, they're not playing varsity this year, are they?
No, I think they're playing a JV schedule, kind of try to get back on track.
But Jason Foster and myself, and coming up, we will recap what happened in Week 3 of the high school football season, take a look ahead to Week 4, plus a couple of special guests. Coming up a little bit later on in the second hour at 7:05, we'll be joined by the quarterback of the Wausau East Lumberjacks, getting set for the Log game this week, Pacey Weber. He'll be with us again at 7:05. And coming up at 6:20, we'll be talking to the head football coach of the 3-0 Abbotsford Falcons, Jacob Knapmiller. So that's all coming up here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. And I guess let's jump in to what happened in week number 3 of the season. It was the first week of conference play for 11-player football. And the Valley Football Association, I was down at Wisconsin Rapids last Friday night as the Wausau West Warriors went into the, the House of Horrors, that is Southwood County Stadium. And again, it was not easy, but in the end, Wausau West able to improve to 3-0 overall, 1-0 in the VFA, defeating Wisconsin Rapids 21-7. The Red Raiders now 0-3 overall, 0-1 in the conference. Ray Reinick took a break during the first half. Again, he had an issue with a quad that made him basically a game-time decision for the Warriors. He did start, had a bit of a slow start, then came back late in the second quarter, and then had an outstanding second half. I had him for, I think, 1 yard rushing total in the first half. He finishes up with 21 carries, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns. J.J. Drews, quarterback, was 10 of 14 for 92 yards, and the defense, again, just stellar. Landon Thompson, 8 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss. Will Mitchell had 9 tackles. DeAndre Bournes had 6 tackles. But, Jason, again, it was not a pretty game for the Warriors, but Ray Reinick stepped up, and boy, that defense continues to step up big time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question Wausau West is a different team when Ray's in there versus not in there. JJ came in for a second week in a row and had a nice balanced attack with the 10 for 14, 92 yards. But yeah, the defense is pretty special right now. They've played 3 games, given up a total of 10 points, and they've also scored 7 points on defense. So that's a nice crew. But overall, Rapids, solid defensive team, solid defensive effort. Nothing came easy for the Warriors on Friday night. Offensively, they struggled to get things going, and that might be a trend for them this year.
DC Everest 3-0 on the season, 1-0 in the Valley Football Association. The Evergreens went to Appleton West, beat a struggling Terrace team by a score of 52-7. It was 31-0 after 1 quarter. And Everest, again, the numbers I was saying to you before the show started don't add up. According to the numbers, and Jim Krieger for the Wisconsin Valley Conference is always very accurate with it. Gets the information from the schools. Everest for the game had 24 plays on offense. 15 rushes, 125 yards, 4 touchdowns. Logan George threw it 9 times, completed 3, but 2 were for touchdowns, 37 yards. So DC Everest did what they were supposed to do. And obviously right now, Appleton West is just struggling big time. But for DC Everest, 3 weeks and 3 wins.
Yeah, and they sit atop the conference with a couple other teams as well. And that's what you're doing right now in the Valley Football Association, is you kind of keep pace. You win the games you're supposed to win the way you're supposed to win them, and I would say that's what Everest did last week.
Marshfield gets on the winning track. And the thing about it is they lost twice in non-conference. Pretty ugly, but now you look and they're 1-0 in the Valley Football Association, 1-2 overall, knocking off Wausau East 38-14. It was 24-0 Marshfield at the end of the first half, but then the Lumberjacks came back, did not show any quit, getting a couple of scores to pull to within 24-14 before a pair of late touchdowns for the Tigers got it back to the 24-point victory. Balanced for Marshfield, ran the ball for 200 yards, threw it for 129. Wausau East quarterback Pacey Weber, who will be our guest again, coming up at 7:05. Another solid night, both throwing and running. He was 15 of 30 for 226 yards and a touchdown throwing. Added 13 rushes for 64 yards. And defensively, Brady Perhoda had 15 tackles in the game for Wausau East. Number one, we were talking about this, important for Marshfield. At home, after a couple of rough road games to start off the campaign in non-conference to show what they are. And that's what they are. They are a team that's able to usually run it and pass it pretty well and hold the home field. And for East, again, I think it's impressive, this program that, before 2023, they had some years where they would start and then they kind of fade away. They were down by 24. They did not show any quit. And I think that's, again, something to build on for this program.
Yeah, I think definitely Wausau East is showing some mental toughness, and that's kind of part of that rebuilding process, is you kind of get that. So hurt and pain doesn't turn into injury, and that's kind of where they're at. And it looks like they're doing a nice job of keeping it together. And Marshfield did what they were supposed to do, or probably what they came into the game thinking they would do against Wausau East. I think there's still kind of a little bit of a question mark surrounding where they're going to end up this season, but good win for them, 1-0 in the conference.
And probably the game of the weekend. I'm going to say something, 26-10. Stevens Point knocks off Hortonville in Hortonville. Panthers 2-1 overall, 1-0 in the conference. Hortonville now 1-2 overall, 0-1. Braylon Smola, he was a workhorse for Stevens Point last Friday night. 36 rushes, 171 yards and a touchdown. Amon Konopaki had 6 catches, 137 yards and 2 scores. And Hortonville continues to struggle offensively, but you have to give credit to the Stevens Point defense. Hortonville held to 97 yards of total offense. I'm going to say it. I think going into the season, talking to you, there were a lot of question marks about Stevens Point, wondering whether or not they were going to be any better than the team that disappointed a year ago. But so far, back-to-back. And that's the thing that I think really jumps out. They didn't just settle with a huge win against Hudson. They went on the road and just as impressive last week.
Yeah, like we said last week, really tough place to play over there in Hortonville. I think Coach did a great job when he was on the show last week talking about where their program's at, what they're expecting to do, and I think they really came through. I think when you look at Smola's rushes, that's a workhorse effort. I mean, it doesn't look like there's a lot of big runs in there. 36 attempts is a lot for a high school running back. I think it speaks to how good Hortonville's defense is, and then 97 total yards of offense for Hortonville kind of speaks to what their offense is too.
Great Northern Conference. Mosinee had a rough week 1, but the Indians have bounced back the last 2 weeks, and they shut down Lakeland up in Minocqua last Friday night by a score of 33-0. Mosinee improves to 2-1 overall, 1-0 in the Great Northern. Lakeland struggling, 0-3, 0-1 in the league. Gavin Obremski, 13 of 19 passing, 243 yards and 2 touchdowns. The first time this season, Obremski has shown the numbers that we saw so many times a year ago. Aiden Shaughnessy had 3 catches, 133 yards and a score. Keegan Jershely, 7 catches, 73 yards and a touchdown. Lakeland, 153 yards of total offense. And Lakeland, normally known a team that can pass the football, only 18 yards passing. In fact, Lakeland now back-to-back shutouts, 7 points scored in the first 3 weeks of the season. But number one, Mosinee, looking like, again, they're going to be tough to beat in the GNC. And Lakeland, again, they've been known for offense over the years, and right now they are struggling big-time offensively.
I would say that's probably the biggest surprise to me thus far in the Great Northern is Lakeland's inability to score points, and I think Mosinee kind of showed or started to show what it's going to look like in the conference this year. Like their weapons kind of stepped up, and I think we're going to see a lot of big numbers coming off of their offense.
I don't know if we call this a huge surprise, but I think it is a surprise. Rhinelander 3-0 overall, 1-0 in the conference, beat Ashland 32-7. It's not a surprise they won that game. I think the surprise is 3-0 for Rhinelander. Truman Lamers 7-13, 176 yards, 3 touchdowns and 1 pick. Owen Kurtz 6 carries, 68 yards for Rhinelander. And the thing about Rhinelander is they were down 21 points in week 1. I mean, they come off a really tough year in 2022, get off to a terrible start in week number 1, find a way to score 22 consecutive points to rally past Tomahawk, and now it looks like this is a team that is just starting to roll downhill and gain a lot of momentum.
Yeah, that's kind of your litmus test to start the year. You do a lot of things in the offseason to try and improve. They weren't a great football team last year, but you put in all that work, both with your X's and O's and your leadership stuff, and to have that big win week 1 and get that momentum. I think maybe Rhinelander's a little bit like Spash in the Valley Football Association, maybe a question mark above them, and they're kind of showing what they have right now.
It's called answering the questions, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Also in the GNC, this was an interesting score. Medford, who had racked up so many points against a very good Onalaska team on the road 2 weeks ago. Well, the Merrill Blue Jays, you talk about bend but don't break, and the Blue Jays bent but really never broke. And Medford able to hold off Merrill 12-0. Medford now 2-1 overall, 1-0 in the conference. Merrill 0-3 and 0-1. Paxton Rothmeyer, 24 rushes, 220 yards, and a touchdown for Medford. Medford had 358 yards rushing as a team. Callum Wheeler, 6 rushes, 48 yards for Merrill. The yardage-wise, it does not look like a 12-0 score. Medford had 408 yards of total offense, Merrill 96, but you have to give a lot of credit to the defense, as I said, because number one, when your offense only has 96 yards, you're on the field a lot.
Yeah.
And you're facing a team that loves to run the football. And as you well know, there's different ways to skin a cat. And, sometimes you just have to bend. But when the big plays come, get the stops. And for the most part, it was 6-0 into the fourth quarter of that game last week. Again, I think something that the Merrill defense can build on. But another team that has struggled immensely scoring points. They have scored 7 points in 3 games.
Yeah, I think the biggest head scratcher for me in this one is that Medford had 408 yards of offense and scored 12 points, considering what they did to a really tough Onalaska team the week before. I think the other thing, kind of like you touched on, is Merrill going to be able to win some games down the stretch here because they're apparently playing pretty solid defense, or at a minimum, eliminating the big plays and keeping them out of the end zone.
And Hayward is now 3-0. 1-0 in the conference, beating Antigo 27-8 on the Red Robins home field. Antigo drops to 1-2 overall, 0-1 in the conference. And Hayward's one of those schools that is leaving the Great Northern after this season. And again, those far northern teams that have been struggling a little bit. And again, it's hard to tell early. Again, you haven't seen Mosinee yet, haven't seen Medford yet. But for a school like Hayward, it's always good to get off to a good start, no matter what the expectations are, whether you're expecting to be among the best teams or your team's just trying to rise up in the conference. To get off to a great start like Hayward has is big. And for Antigo, I think that was one of the games you kind of needed. When you look at the GNC, you got to find ways to win the games against some of these other teams that you consider in the middle of the pack, especially on the home field. So that's a tough loss for Antigo.
Yeah, and as these games start to unfold, you get a little better indication of how things are going to play out the rest of the season. And I think Hayward kind of looks at their matchup this week with Rhinelander and says, that's a big one. Like you get a W in that one for either team, and it kind of separates you maybe a little bit from the bottom of the pack.
Merriwood Conference, and we'll be talking to Abbotsford coach Jacob Knapmiller in just a few minutes, but the Abbey Falcons are 3-0 overall, 1-0 in the conference, beating Ladysmith 40-27. Ladysmith is now 2-1. This was a substitute game because Wild Rose from the CWC Small forfeited, not playing varsity football this season. But Ladysmith, a playoff team from a year ago, had a 19-18 lead at the half. But again, the two-headed monster runners for Abbotsford, Christian Fuentes and J.V. Castillo, both big yet again. Fuentes, 15 rushes, 157 yards in the score. Castillo, 16 rushes, 155 yards for Abbotsford. It's pretty simple for both Abbotsford and the teams that play Abbotsford. Abbotsford needs to run the football, and the teams that play them need to stop the run. And so far in 3 games, those two runners have both been in triple digits each time.
Yeah, kind of like the Badgers with their two-headed ground monster. If you got 2 guys who can rush for 300 yards week in and week out, that's going to be tough to stop in high school football. And you can game plan all you want. It's a lot of times when you're able to run the ball like that, you can either stop it or you can't.
Auburndale still undefeated as well, 3-0, 1-0 in the conference. Beat Loyal 27-8. Loyal actually hung around better than I expected. Auburndale had been running it up pretty big early on. Loyal struggled early on. Evan Scholl had 21 rushes, 186 yards, and 2 scores for Auburndale. Louis Nicolai, 21 rushes, 87 yards for Loyal. Auburndale, again, it's a 3-0 team that we don't know yet because the first 2 games were substitute games because of forfeits. Here's a Loyal team that's struggling a bit. But again, you play who's on the schedule, right? That no matter who they are, you got to get the job done. In Auburndale, 3 weeks and 3 wins.
Yeah, and you like you said, you only play on your schedule, and every win in high school football is a good win. I've never had a bad win in my career. Bad losses, but never a bad win. And this kind of starting to speak a little bit to these crossover games and what it might look like for the Merriwood here. So they're kind of, I would imagine they're get another week of these crossovers, and then we'll start to see how this Merriwood really stacks up.
Marathon beat Rothschild 40-0 last week in a game heard on Bull Falls Radio. Marathon 2-1. overall, 1-0 in the conference. Wausau now 0-3 and 0-1. Cooper Huxama, 9 of 11, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Chris Marcel, 7 rushes, 95 yards and a touchdown. Tyler Underwood, 6 receptions for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns. Marathon is also a team that I think we're going to find out more this week when they take on Assumption. But again, after a rough go of it the week before, to be able to bounce back and do what they were supposed to do. They took charge early and able to get back on the bus and get a big W.
Yep, do what you're supposed to do against teams that you should beat and come away with a good conference win.
Edgar doing what they do. They rushed out to an early lead and beat Pacelli 50-0. Edgar now 2-1, 1-0. Pacelli 1-2, 0-1. Tegan Strite 6 of 7 passing, 176 yards, 3 touchdowns. They didn't pass much, but they certainly got a lot of production from the pass game. Leighton Schuett, 3 catches for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns for Edgar. Ethan Cowart, 24 rushes, 41 yards for Pacelli. For Edgar, these crossover games had to be a bit of a test because in a different way. They had the test against Stratford the week before. These are different kind of tests, aren't they, for coaches and players?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit last week with Carter when he was on the show about what the preparation looks like and how different it is from week to week. And I think it also gives Coach Sins the opportunity to probably play a lot of kids and get some kids some experience that they might use for some depth down the road.
And finally, Colby defeated Iola Scandinavia 46-14. It was actually a pretty close game for much of the first half. But then Colby scored 2 touchdowns in the final 36 seconds of the second quarter, including a backbreaker. A Colton Orth 39-yard interception return with 7 seconds left in the second to make it 32-0 at the intermission. Gavin Ross, 20 rushes, 216 yards, 3 touchdowns for Colby. Jensen Rice, 110 yards passing, 90 yards rushing for Iola Scandinavia. It looks like Colby, again, being Colby at 3-0 early in the season. And I do think Iola is still a team that's a better team. They faced Wittenberg, Burnhamwood, and Colby the last 2 weeks. They're going to learn a lot going into the CWC small portion of their schedule.
Yeah, I would say they're going to be happy to have these in their rearview mirror.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a break, come back with our first guest. Again, coming up at 7:05, we'll have Wausau East quarterback Pacey Weber as our student-athlete guest for this week. And coming up next, we will hear from the head coach of the Abbotsford Falcons, 3-0 on the season, Jacob Knapmiller. That's coming up next as we continue on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio 98.9 and 1230. And welcome back. It's the Big High School Sports Show. Every Wednesday from 6 until 8 p.m., talking nothing but high school sports and during the fall, high school football here on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. And also don't forget, if you miss the show live, we put it on right after the show ends at bullfallsradio.com/sports or by just clicking on the sports link and then the Big High School Sports Show as well. So, again, if you missed the show live, always tune in both online at bullfallsradio.com and also where you get your podcasts. And at this time each week, we talk to one of our Central Wisconsin head football coaches. And this week, from the Abbotsford Falcons, off to a very good start. 3 wins and no losses, coming off a good win over Lady Smith last week. Very happy to welcome back to the program the head coach of the Falcons as we will talk here to Jacob Knapmiller. Coach, let me get the bright button here pushed. Coach, first of all, congrats on a good start, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chad. It's awesome to be a part of this.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk. Let's kind of lump together last year and this year because Abbotsford's had so much success in terms of football for a handful of years, making the playoffs, got off to a fast start last season, had a rough go of it when the Merriwood Conference began and missed the playoffs for the first time in a while. What was the mindset going into the offseason in terms of trying to get back to that level that Abbotsford's been so good at, and what has worked in order for you to get off to a good start this season?
Yeah, I think last year there was a culmination of a lot of factors. We had some injuries. We had a lot of young guys playing. I think we started a freshman at our feature back, and yeah, we had some confidence that was somewhat of a facade coming out of the first 4 games against we only played 3 of them. Our Ladysmith game last year was canceled, but we had probably not the strongest teams from the strongest conferences as opponents, and compared to what you see in the Merriwood weekly, I think maybe our kids weren't mentally ready for what we were going to see once we rolled into that part of our season. But that was still, we were down a quarterback, and JV Castillo had a sprained ankle the whole year, and starting a freshman running back, and we were pretty young and inexperienced all around, and made a lot of young guy mistakes last year. So I think when you go into the off season, you're thinking, hopefully not thinking we're automatically just going to get better because we're getting older, but using the rough Merriwood schedule and our record in it motivated a lot of our guys to not be in that situation again.
Coach, looks like this last week was actually an interesting game for you guys. I know you said you didn't have Ladysmith last year, but to be a 19-18 game at halftime, what did you guys do at halftime to turn around the second half?
Really, Ladysmith was a challenge, was an interesting game for us. Kind of exciting to see a team like them, because we don't see maybe a ton of them usually non-conference, but they were a really long, athletic spread team offensively, and that kind of gave us a contrast in styles to normally what we see and what we run, and we embraced the physicality of our offense and our run game, and that third quarter coming out just really showed how the mentality of our kids was quite different than theirs. The physicality that we played with was different, and that was the difference maker in that third quarter.
Again, we're talking to Abbotsford Falcons head football coach Jacob Knapmiller here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, with former Wausau West head football coach Jason Foster. I'm Chad Holmes. Was it actually a break for you and your team to have that kind of game instead of, say, Wild Rose, and to take nothing away from Wild Rose? But right now we're seeing, when teams are forced to go off and find a new opponent because of a forfeit, it can be very difficult to find sometimes a good challenge. I imagine that, as you talked about, going into the challenging Merriwood Conference here, starting in about a week or so, even though these games do count as conference games, these crossovers, but having that kind of game, I imagine, as opposed to playing a team that was struggling to get the numbers like Wild Rose would have been if they would have played, or by finding a substitute that would not have been at the level that you saw with Ladysmith. I imagine that was the perfect kind of game to get you ready for the second half of the season.
Yeah, I think you look at Ladysmith, they play some quality opponents on their conference between Hurley and Unity and Grantsburg, and they definitely did not back down from the speed that we played at, which was really good for us. And like you said, it's kind of getting harder now with all the teams going 8-man to get an opponent in that fine Division 6 area that is competitive and still around, not an 8-man, and not up in that Division 4 or 5 level that you maybe shouldn't be playing at that point if you're us right now. So yeah, we were very fortunate to play them, and it was a great experience for our kids.
Coach, tell me more about your offensive style. I look at the stats from last week, and to have 2 running backs, one run for 15 times for 157 yards and another run for 16 rushes for 155. How nice is that to have those types of weapons? And it sounds like your style of play is very smash mouth. So tell me about what a luxury it is to have 2 guys like that.
Yeah, JV and Christian are some of the quicker, faster dudes in our area. They both ran track. JV excels in baseball, but he did do some dual sport this year, and ran our conference meet, and was right up there in the finals with some of the fastest guys. And Christian's just a sophomore, and he, I believe, was closer, if over, to 1,000 yards last year as a freshman, and kind of put on some weight and put on and gain some speed, and they both have the ability to hit one every time they touch it. JV we use in a lot of different ways. We get them out of the pocket, we get them in a run pass situations, but really we up front just want to make holes with double teams and really kind of grind teams in the ground offensively with our run game, and our O-line has bought into that, and they're playing really well right now.
Kind of building on that in terms of the way that you play. Often, when I've seen your team play, it takes time to get the eyes going in the right direction if you're on the other side of the field. I imagine with kids that have been part of the program, as you said, having some experience, even though it may have been difficult experiences at times last season, but does it feel like the offense is clicking at a pretty high level pretty early in the season, and that makes it a lot tougher for your opponents who may not see exactly the kind of offense that you run with a lot of misdirection and maybe just it takes that little bit of a half step that gives you guys the edge on offense?
Yeah, I think that might be part of the deal too with non-conference success is, those guys don't necessarily see you every year and game plan for a style of yours, and you go to Marywood and conference teams, and they've seen you a few years in a row. We played Marathon a few years before we even joined the Marywood, so I think we're on like a 7 or 9 year streak against those guys. So when you don't change your scheme a lot in that period of time, I think teams get better at coaching against it. But it's definitely when you have kids that have been in your system and take pride in what you guys and what you do and have been around and understand it, makes a big difference.
Again, we're talking to Abbotsford head football coach Jacob Knapmiller here on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. You mentioned earlier in the conversation in terms of during the off season, in terms of having the mindset that you're not just going to show up better because you're a year older. Has there been anything in particular that's jumped out in terms of the preparation, whether it was during the off season, whether it was during the preseason practice, or even early in the season, that your guys are doing a lot better beyond just being more experienced, but actually improving in certain areas?
I guess we were so young last year and inexperienced with a lot. We had a lot of underclassmen playing, whether it be due to injury or whatever. But we talk about the commitment and what makes you successful athletically, and a lot of that is strength. But we're not going to be big just by the makeup of the kids in our school. We're not ever going to probably be the biggest team on the field when we enter conference play, and so we took pride in speed training. I offer speed and agility classes. Our new basketball coach, Coach Rao, has been a part of that program and getting kids pushing towards that are basketball guys as well, and he happens to be our D coordinator football team. So it's a nice match that way. But our kids bought in the off season to that speed emphasis, and a lot of our guys are track guys, and I happen to be the head track coach and work with sprinters. So majority of our players that play either dual sported in track and baseball or did track, and I really believe that that's an edge in the off season for us.
Yeah, that's a great point, Coach. Being able to have those athletes who play multiple sports together and even multiple sports in the same season, and then to have coaches who kind of coach them in different seasons as well, so they have that exposure. That's really good stuff. Looking forward this week to another conference but crossover game with Iola Scandinavia. First off, what are you kind of looking for out of your matchup this week with Iola? And then also having that game film of them against Colby, you can kind of start to take a sneak peek down the road a little bit and seeing what you might be getting out of Colby. So what did you learn about their matchup with Colby last week, and what are you expecting out of Iola this week?
It was really nice to kind of see how Colby defended them. We run a similar set of base defense, and so to see some of the ways that Colby maybe was hurt by Iola's run game. Their quarterback is a really quick kid. When we talk about track kids, I think he was one of the state finalists in multiple events down there as a young guy. So his ability to move in the pocket and buy him time to throw and the ability to break one running is definitely a concern of ours. He had a couple nice long runs against Colby last week. Defensively, against our offense against them, it's a matter of just doing what we do and doing it well, communicating and adjusting, and really that's kind of an every week thing. So Lady Smith threw a lot of kind of random things at our offensive line, which was good for them to communicate and adjust to, and for that kind of prepared us for a lot of different things, a lot of different fronts, and so we're excited for another challenge offensively against them. But the quarterback for them definitely is of a concern.
The thing about these crossover games is there's a little bit of luck in the draw. I think it could be argued that this could be the toughest crossover conference game that you could have, because I think Iola Scandinavia, despite being 1 and 2, the teams they played, Wittenberg, Burnhamwood, and Colby, they could easily be the best team in that conference, and you have to go over there as well. That's a little bit of bad luck in that respect, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is what it is, I could work both ways for both conferences in terms of who they think is better, best, or who they want to play to, and we knew that going into it, and you can't control that stuff, but it is. I think hopefully with the future of our conference being a little more concrete, the luck of the draw doesn't have as much impact on things, but we're excited to go there. We played their state championship team in level 3 a few years ago with Mr. Hittner in the backfield, and we had a nice team that year. Lost him by I think 2 scores, but that was our last trip over there. So that's the last memory we have in Iola, and we're looking forward to going back there. It was a great experience.
Yeah, I think back to my time as a head coach, and you used to kind of do this with your non-conference games. You kind of pick matchups depending on where you are in your program at that time, or things that you might end up seeing if you have a nice run, things you might see down the road in the playoffs that maybe you don't see within your conference. And it sounds like with your matchup with Lady Smith and their athleticism and spread offense last week, and then a good quarterback play this week with Iola Scandinavia, definitely the potential there to maybe help you guys out. If obviously too soon to start talking playoffs, but kind of those things you can put in your back pocket this time of year as you look down the road to maybe seeing some competition in the playoffs who you might not see in your conference.
Yeah, the spread concepts always are the ones that we feel like we lack in the Merriwood. That isn't the case as much recently because Auburndale runs a little bit more of an open offense, and Marathon does as well. And so we're getting kind of a well-rounded look of schemes now versus when we were back in the Cloverwood and everyone ran wing T, and then you get in the playoffs and. For a receiver was rare, let alone 4 of them. So, it's I think having a running quarterback and an option scheme is a nice thing for your defense to see before you get into an opponent that you don't normally see in the playoffs and they throw it at you.
Let's talk about the Merriwood. Is this the crossover, and then next week you start playing your Merriwood Conference foes again? Man, it looks loaded again. I mean, there's not a soft touch in that conference, is there?
Yeah, I guess you look at the non-conference records, and I think we only have 1 loss, I believe, unless Pittsville lost 2. But I believe Marathon was the only one.
And Edgar lost.
I forgot about that one. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So, our non-conference schedule, either we played somebody really tough or the Merriwood teams that were victorious, and that, I think, is an indication of what we're in store for here. And as we keep telling the kids, we're getting a little sloppy with some things and mentally not focused, and you can get away with some things against certain opponents, but man, when you hit week 5 and you start hitting Marywood teams all in a row, and they're going to make you pay for those things.
And you mentioned that, and I should know this, but I don't remember. What is the future for Abbotsford in terms of conference? Where are you next year? Do you?
We go small, so we're Auburndale and Edgar stay with us, and then we're with Pacelli, Assumption, Rashholtz, and I'm missing one from that conference, I think.
Right.
Iola.
Oh, that's a good program, obviously. And something that you mentioned, the old days in the Cloverwood, and here at our station, we covered Newman. We covered them for those years in the Cloverwood. I always thought it was a fun league, and now it's obviously changed with a lot of those schools going to 8-player and conferences changing. But as you look back, that was really a competitive football league, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was so much fun, but man, it was nerve-wracking as a coach to have to prepare for. Again, Newman had a few really nice years there. Had always had speed and talent there, and then your traditional teams, you just got beat up every week. It was
Yep.
it was the strong, physical, quick, Owens and Gilmans, and you never got really a week off. And so it's nice the Marywood's only smaller 5 teams now, where you don't have that week in, week out. You don't get ground down as much, but that was sure a fun league.
And I think that back then, if I'm not mistaken, you didn't play non-conference games. You were right in there, and you played a conference game, and you talk about a meat grinder. That was 9 weeks of a meat grinder.
Absolutely, yeah. There was no planning, no having to find opponents. It was good and bad, I guess.
And I guess before we wrap it up, your school has had really good success in recent years, but again, it's a smaller school, and it's probably always a battle to make sure that you do, as you talked about, get the multi-sport kids out and be working with all the coaches. Where do you think we stand in Central Wisconsin? How hard is it right now for schools of your size and similar sizes to continue to put out quality football programs? Because we're seeing, again, we see teams that are not able to put out a varsity squad, or we see games that are one-sided. What's the key in terms of what you've learned in order to maintain a successful football program?
Oh man, I don't know. I thought we had a few successful years there in a row, and I kind of I listened to some of the things Jason said along the way about raising your expectations, and as you get better, kids want to be a part of it, and I kind of thought it would take care of itself, but kind of within the last few years and the COVID deal and some of the curveballs that were thrown at us, I think when we return to play in normalcy here, for some reason the desire for kids to play, to challenge themselves or do something difficult faded a little bit, and football is definitely in that boat, and we've seen it just as well as some of these other programs. We only suit right now 23 kids. We have four seniors and 5 freshmen out, and we had a bunch of kids that played last year, started, that walked away for various reasons, and so I don't know what the answer is. You look at Edgar, Stratford, Colby; they maintain really good athletes and families sticking together and coming out yearly, and their numbers stay up. But like you said, the programs that are on that fence or on the lower end of things seem to be on that downward turn, which is kind of a scary direction.
Yeah, with those numbers, I can definitely see the challenge, Coach. You talked about how last year, maybe when you got to 4-0 and then you hit that Marywood conference in stride, that a lot of your younger players weren't quite sure what to expect. Now that they've gone through it a year and you're kind of on the precipice of heading back in there, what preparations do those kids take, or do you take with them in leading them to make sure that they build off of those experiences from last year, that they are mentally tougher, that they are more prepared week in and week out for what they're going to face?
Yeah, I think you try to throw and simplify and make a game plan as simple as possible, and say what your expectations are from day one. And we've done the same thing for 6 weeks now since the beginning of camp and even summer camp. And really simplifying it and saying, if we get really good at these things, we're going to be a good team. Coach Rao does a nice job defensively with making it simple. And, you really only have one job. And for a kid to buy into that, that's my job, that's my area of focus, is really important. But with our youth returning with only 4 seniors, we have a lot of days like tonight's practice where we lack that focus, and we don't have a lot of kids that are willing to kind of pull the kids back into where we need to be mentally. And so I hope we figure it out as a program, because you don't want to be complacent at 4-0 or 3-0, I guess, and going into this week, if we, like we said with the Iola kid and the athleticism in the backfield, if we check out mentally, we're going to Maryland with a loss. So that's our challenge this week, is to step it up in that regard. And
Coach Foster, any final words for Coach Knapmiller?
No, I'm great start to the season, Coach. I'm actually, each week I go through after the show and kind of look for the score I'm really going to look for on Friday night after the game, and we'll be very intrigued to see how this one ends up as you guys wrap up your crossovers and get ready for official Marywood Conference play next week. Best of luck.
Hey, thank you.
Coach Jacob Knapmiller, the Abbotsford Falcons, again 3-0 on the season, heading to Iola, Scandinavia for a Marywood Central Wisconsin small crossover on Friday night. We're going to take a quick break and then come back. More to come here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio 98.9 and 1230. And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. Thanks again to Jacob Knapmiller, the head coach of the Abbotsford Falcons, for joining us. And again, I mean, we were just talking off the air. I mean, they're off to such a good start. 3-0. They're 1-0 in the conference. They got really, I think, a tough game at Iola. I think that you're right. I think that's going to be one of the more interesting games coming up on Friday night. But boy, there's not a game after that you say, we can mark that down as a W. I mean, all those Marywood Conference teams, it's a small conference, but boy, they are loaded this year, aren't they?
Yeah, and the other thing I think that works maybe to their advantage is the game they had last week against Ladysmith, that so many of these scores in these crossover games have been big blowouts and 30, 40-point victories, and they were down a point at halftime and kind of had to dig down a little bit and show some mental toughness to come away with a win. So maybe that helps them down the stretch to maybe find a win where maybe they're not expecting one.
Before, in our first segment, we had a recap of the Marywood Conference teams, and I forgot one game that was on Thursday night at Southwood County, and it was a rematch of a Level 1 playoff at that same site just last year, where Assumption beat Pittsville by 20 points, but in this case, it was 60-16. Pittsville led 52-3 at the intermission. They scored 44 points in the second quarter alone, and just an outstanding effort by Pittsville. And I was watching some of that game, and Jacob Hardinger, the quarterback, he was stellar. He was 5 of 6 passing, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dawson Luther, 12 carries, 164 yards. Kellen Getzinger had 4 catches, 114 yards. I mean, this is a Pittsville team. Again, I think we touched on it earlier in the season. They had 1 win going into the final 2 weeks of last season. They won 2 in a row to earn a playoff spot with 3 wins. And then they played, I think, a very competitive game against Assumption on the road in Level 1. And they have come out red hot to win 3 games in a row. And for Assumption, last week, 2 weeks ago, they gave up 55 points in the first half. Last week they gave up 52 points in the first half. That's going to be a bit of a shell-shocked team as well. So I guess we can take it on two hands. Pittsville, number one, very impressive and working their way into the conversation in that tough Merriwood. An Assumption, I thought, the team that we expected to be maybe at the top of the CWC Small. Man, you give up that many points back-to-back weeks. There's got to be a lot of soul-searching in that locker room.
Yeah, it's hard to keep a team up like that once you've had that. At that point, you start looking for the small victories. You start looking for first downs. You start looking for stops, make sure they have a punter and getting their punter on the field. And I do agree. I think Pittsville has the potential to sneak up on some people and maybe claw their way up to maybe the top half of that Merriwood Conference.
And they had big play potential based on what I was seeing. I mean, that's, again, something where, and you know it as well, it's so much easier when you have that potential to get chunks of yardage, to get the big plays, to have, instead of a 12-play drive where so many things can go wrong, the opportunity to get a 60-yard touchdown, whether through the air or on the ground, and it looks like Pittsville's got that.
Yeah.
Also, last week we have not touched on yet the CWC Large and Stratford. I mean, there's been some, we're 3 weeks into the season, and we've seen some ups and downs for some really interesting squads. And Stratford coming off a 40-6 loss the week before at home to Edgar. They went on the road and went to Amherst and won 33-13. But it was a game that was, I think, it was much closer than that score would indicate. It was actually 7-0 Amherst after the first quarter. Even going to the fourth quarter, it was only 20-13 Stratford, but they scored a couple of touchdowns in the fourth to win. Jack Tubbs had a big night, 6 of 10 passing, 67 yards, 2 touchdowns, 11 rushes, 101 yards, and a touchdown. This season so far, you've seen defenses focusing on Colder Kilty. He had such a massive season a year ago. He's still a workhorse for Stratford, but he's finding the defense is keeping an eye on him. He had 31 rushes, 95 yards, and a touchdown. But even, the numbers being a little bit down, that Kilty is still that focus of the defense.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, is 20 rushes for 240 yards a better game,
right,
or is 30 rushes for just over 100 yards?
It means you have the ball a lot, right?
Exactly. And those are tough yards against probably what I would imagine in Amherst is a really good defense.
Wittenberg-Burnhamwood, boy, they have been stellar so far. Nobody's touched the Chargers in their first 3 games. I mean, they have been blowout, and blowout. 47-0 against Nakusa last week. Chargers 3-0, 1-0 in the conference. Nakusa 1-2, 0-1 in the league. Nathan Wapenake had another big night, 14 of 19 passing, 235 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks, added 6 rushes for 69 yards and a touchdown. This is a Whitburn team that has been showing the offense and the defense the first 3 weeks. Again, they have not been tested yet. Probably won't be this week. They do have a Amherst game coming up next week. But, boy, they have come out very impressive so far this year.
Yeah, those are going to be 3 just outstanding games when Wittenberg, Stratford, and Amherst kind of beat each other up a little bit. And the efficiency of 14 for 19 passing, 235. And I don't think the teams in that conference see that week in and week out. So that's going to be tough to defend.
Interesting game between 2 teams that needed wins badly, Shiocton and Spencer Columbus. And Shiocton got the 7-0 win over Spencer Columbus. Shiocton 1-2, 1-0, 0-3, 0-1 for Spencer Columbus. Despite Spencer Columbus 284 yards, 88 yards for Shiocton. That's got to be a game when you walk off the field. It's got to be really disconcerting and depressing because you do pretty much everything but finish drives.
Yeah, it's kind of a head scratcher. It reminds me a little bit of kind of those Edgar Stratford 1-score, 2-point games like that. But to have 284 yards of offense and have a goose egg at the end of the game, that's a tough one.
And Wyowega Fremont, a year ago they took big strides. They had been a program that had struggled for a lot of years. They worked their way to the postseason a year ago. And Wyowega Fremont now 3-0, 1-0 in the conference, beating Manawa 50-7. Manawa 1-2 in the overall, 0-1 in the conference. Cameron Zilke, 19 rushes, 158 yards, 3 touchdowns. Added 9 of 18 passing for 90 yards, 2 more touchdowns. But it's always good to see programs that had struggled for a while turn it around. And it's not easy to break in when you have 3 such good teams in your conference. And in the past, Spencer Columbus was a very good team. They had some really good seasons. Shiocton, obviously, a year ago made a run all the way to state. Manawa's had some talent, but Wyowega Fremont was always near the bottom of that league. And now, all of a sudden, right behind the big 3, there's Wyowega Fremont.
Yeah, right behind the big 3. And is there room for them to get a big win this year and maybe be in that top 3?
we're going to save the 8-player stuff for after our student athlete guest, but we have about 3 minutes to go. Let's kind of break down where we are in 11-player football after 3 weeks, because one of the interesting things is we just got to Labor Day, but we're a third of the way through the regular season. It's something I mentioned to you when we came in. We are seeing a lot of different teams, not just a couple of teams, but a lot of teams struggling offensively. Do you have any take on why we're seeing so many teams that are having struggles putting up points on the board?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, generally speaking, early in the season, the defense is ahead of the offense, right? Because they have less to game plan for. And those kids just react and can rely on their athleticism. I'm a big defensive guy, and you definitely rely on that early in the season.
Are you saying it's all defensive brains ahead of these offensive minds? The defensive coaches are smarter than the offensive people?
That's what I would have been telling my offensive coaches for sure. But the other interesting part about it is it's both teams. Like, the scores either seem to be incredibly lopsided, 50-0, 41-6, whatever the case may be, or these really low scoring on both sides, 7-0, 8-12.
We've seen multiple 7-0 scores this year, which is, I don't recall many of those at all.
And to see those in conference games, like when you look at Tomahawk's not in that conference this year, but Lakeland and Tomahawk, and then Lakeland.
But similar high schools.
Yeah, Medford and Merrill this last week. Huge offensive lopsided numbers, but a 12-0 score like that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And it also shows, again, I think, the importance of having the big play, because sometimes you can move the football. I mean, but it's hard in the high school ranks to have a 14-play touchdown drive.
Yeah,
because so many bad things can happen, whether it's turnovers or whether it's penalties or whatever. It's just hard to put together that long of a drive.
Yeah, you make a great point there. And then when you're not scoring, then special teams plays a much bigger role in the game. I think the Warriors kind of had that experience last week in Rapids. They couldn't get their offense going, so their punt team spent more time on the field in that game than the first two games combined, and they had a lot of mistakes. They had two offsides penalties on punt, and then 2 punts that probably didn't go where they were hoping they would go, and that flips the field and kind of changes the momentum in a game. So I think those things are factoring in as well.
Absolutely. We have to take a quick break for a news update. Then we'll come back with the second hour of the program. And coming up, we're going to talk about big game Friday night, the log game. First time in 3 years we've seen the log game. And we're going to talk about the resurrection of the Wausau East varsity program, the big win in week number 1, and the process from their quarterback, Pacey Weber. He'll be joining us as our student athlete guest coming up in just a few minutes after the news update. So, again, another hour to go. Join us every Wednesday night from 6 until 8 p.m. for the Big High School Sports Show. And we will have hour number 2 coming up. With Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, online at bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. And welcome back. It is hour number 2 of the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. To start off hour number 2, it's our student athlete guest for this week, and from Wausau East High School, quarterback of the East Lumberjacks, Pacey Weber. First of all, Pacey, thank you very much for coming on over.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to be a part of this, and I appreciate the interview. Thank you.
Absolutely. And the good part is we're not too far from Wausau East, so it's just down the hill from Wausau East.
Quick drive.
Exactly right. Well, let's jump right in, because, as I said when we were sitting here during the news, it's great to have Wausau East back. It just it feels more normal for everybody, even though and not at East. But let's talk about the process, because if not for guys like you and your teammates, it could have easily just gone away completely, because it's not easy when you're trying to rebuild a program, especially when you didn't have the opportunity to play on Friday nights a year ago. It's all JV football. What kept you and your teammates going when you didn't have that opportunity to play varsity football last year?
I guess I would go back to last year when we were juniors and we found out our 8-man varsity schedule was canceled and we had to play JV. It was a tough feeling sitting in the meeting room hearing that news, but we knew that we had to go out there and had to play a season, and we had to come out strong next year. And it was all about just, keep going, keep pushing. In the weight room when guys, wanted to give up, it's, hey, remember, next year's varsity, next year's Friday night, next year's Friday night. It's just the words that kept echoing, our brotherhood. We just had to keep the ball rolling so we could keep guys out and just most importantly, get out there and compete on Friday night.
Yeah, I think one of the most impressive things to me thus far is where you were 2 years ago, where you were a year ago, and the fact that you are now fielding 3 11-man football teams, a JV2, a JV1, and a varsity. And the first step in that process, when you get back to the point where you guys are at this year, is to come out and compete and to win that first game week 1. But then I've watched your games the last 2 weeks as well, and it's a mindset, right? Like you guys there's definitely games when you're going to line up across from your opponent and know that you're probably outmatched at certain positions or maybe the line of scrimmage or whatever. What mindset does it take at practice every day and then heading into Friday nights back in the 11-man varsity level to make sure you guys are ready to compete? What do you guys do to mentally prepare?
And that's a good point. We know we're the smallest school in the conference. It gives us kind of a chip on our shoulder to go out there every week in practice, and we got to really take it seriously because at the end of the day we don't have infinite amount of depth, and our coaching staff does a great job of keeping us ready and not getting complacent, and teammates do a great job of keeping each other up and just getting ready for Fridays and for the games, because at the end of the day it's all about Friday night, and got to bring it every day, every practice, no matter how tired you are. You just got to bring it.
You mentioned the term chip on the shoulder.
Yeah,
it feels like I've heard that a lot from the folks over on the east side in terms of I think East athletics generally, not just football. How do you guys use that? I mean, I think it's probably something that can be a very big positive, but at the same time, you don't want to be such a big chip that it actually weights you down a little bit.
No, I get where you're coming from. We like to use, the chip on the shoulder as more of a motivation standpoint, just so, a lot of schools look down on us, and we use that as hey, we got to go out there and compete. It doesn't matter about anything else. It's just we got to go out there and compete, and we gotta do what we do, and that's play football.
Yeah, let's look at your season so far. Kind of starting off, we'll look at last week: 15 for 30 passing, 226 yards, touchdown, 13 rushes for 64, and that's kind of been your week in and week out. Like lot of attempts, good completion rate, getting those yards and that touchdown, and I think kind of surprising some people with your feet.
Definitely over the winter, it was a process of trying to get faster. I wasn't real happy with how fast I was last year, and I knew I'd be having to get outside of the pocket a little bit more. And the drills we do in practice help me kind of get ready for the week. And I just want to thank my quarterbacks coach, Coach Garrett, for always getting me ready every week and always giving me good drills for our next opponents, and just getting ready every week.
Let's go back to the first game, because I had your coach on the program before week 1, and one thing that jumped out was how confident he was. He sounded like a guy, because when you're returning after not having varsity football for 2 years, the expectations were probably, well, let's see if East can get through the season. But you guys went out there, you went on the road, and you won the first game. What was the whole experience like? Number one, getting on the bus with your guys again and going to a Friday night lights and hitting the field up in Lakeland, and to get that first game, and then to see it develop, to be ahead, and then to win it and come back on the bus. What was that whole experience like for game number 1 of this season?
It was definitely an exciting experience. Just getting to school before the game, it was a lot of excitement. Knowing this is our first true varsity game as seniors, and this could really count for something. And once we got out on the field, we knew it was going to be a battle. We knew it wasn't going to be an easy win. We'd have to battle every second, and we did a great job. Lakeland, they scored early, and we did a great job of not letting that faze us and just keeping it together, keeping the composure, and just drive after drive, taking things slow, and defense held together well. And at the end of the game, it was just amazing feeling. But we didn't want to hang our heads too high in the fact that it was one game, because 9-game season, so we still got 8 more to go after that.
Let me. You talk about composure, and that's something that often is a learned trait. And as you said, you and your seniors and everybody else involved in it haven't had the opportunity at that level, at the varsity level, when you have, something that is adversity, some sort of adversity. And you've seen a little adversity now the last 2 weeks. How do you guys, I don't know if you call it a shortcut, but try to get that experience in maybe a quicker way then, because obviously time is limited. It's not a case where you're going to have multiple years to be able to learn all this. How do you handle adverse situations? Say last week, I thought it was very impressive that it's 24-0 at halftime. But you came out and you scored 2 touchdowns, and all of a sudden you're 10 points down in Marshfield, defending conference tri-champions. How do you guys go about, when you do run into a little adversity to try to, when you haven't had that experience factor to kind of go back on?
I mean, yeah, it was no surprise that we came out of the game really slow. We went into halftime. It was pretty quiet. I kind of stepped up and said, look, guys, we're going out there. We get the ball after half. The score is 0-0. Our goal is to put up a touchdown. To take a 7-0 lead for second half, so it would have been 24-7, and that was our one goal. I repeated is let's go down and score. It's score going on at halftime is 0-0. And turn the ball over, or defense doesn't make a great play. It's on the sideline. It's keeping your heads up. Hey, we got this, guys. Next play. Always thinking about right here, right now. Thinking about the next play.
Sounds like some really strong leadership. So tell me. Obviously, to be able to go from where you were at this year or last year to where you were at this year, it took the guys who've been committed for 3 going on 4 years to really dig in and hit the weight room and develop all those other skills that go along to being a solid football team. But it also required probably getting some guys out for football who maybe have never played before, or maybe got them back out for football who haven't played for a few years. What did you do and your teammates do as leaders to encourage some of those other athletes walking the halls at Wausau East to get back out on that football field?
I guess our way of trying to get dudes back into the program was, that feeling of being out there on Friday, and it's a special feeling. And you always hear about people who don't play and who look back on it, and they always talk about how, oh man, I wish I would have played. And you don't want to be that. You don't want to be that guy that feels that way, because it's definitely a horrible feeling. And the dudes, there's still a lot of dudes that at the end of the day, you can't budge them. So it's all right. Screw it. We're gonna work with what we got, and we're gonna go in the weight room every day in the off season and work and take everything as serious as we can and work with what we got.
Again, we're talking to Wausau East senior quarterback Pacey Weber here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. As Coach said, obviously you're one of the leaders on this team. When you look at your teammates, who are the other guys that maybe you look at as leaders, the guys that are the ones that when you do face a little adversity you can lean on, or the guys that over the long process of getting you back to this point and playing varsity football have been leaders both in the locker room, on the field, in the halls? Other guys you look towards?
I'd say definitely one of our other biggest leaders is our other senior captain, our right guard, Noah DeMoss. He's done a great job of just helping guys stay in the weight room and helping keep guys out. And I could say the same for our junior captains, Jaden, Garrett, and McCray Polachek. They've both done a great job of keeping dudes in sports and keeping dudes in the weight room and just encouraging people, to keep going and keeping that leadership, which is something we really need in the locker room. And it's great that we have it.
Yeah, so the log game. So this is one of those games. This will be the 54th version of the log game. Obviously, East-West are always good games. Yeah. You look forward to. I'm sure you guys have circled it on your schedule. Tell me what it means to you and your teammates, and maybe what little extra whatever you're putting into practice this week to prepare for it.
No, it's definitely a different feeling knowing that this is going to be the last log game, and that we got to kind of go out there and put it all on the line, because we got to leave a legacy for East, and people remember the last one is the one they will remember. And we know Wausau West is a good football team. That's not a secret. We know they're good. We just got to go out there, play our game, focus on who we are, and at the end of the day, keep our composure and play as Wausau East.
Talk more about that game in a few minutes, but let's step off the gridiron for a few moments. What other sports are you involved in?
I do track in the spring, and I just lift in the winter.
What do you run in track, or what? Or how are you involved in track? Is it running?
I do a little bit whatever I can. I do a little bit of jumping, sprinting, relays, whatever I can to help the team.
And what do you like to do when you're not playing football, not in the weight room? What do you do in your free time?
I'm a huge sports card guy. I love sports cards. I'm a big Madden guy, and I play a little bit of Fortnite every now and then.
What's your for sports cards? What are the ones that are your most the ones that you would say this is the one I just love to have? The one you want to take a look at when you think about it?
I'd say probably the favorite I own right now. I pulled a Kenny Pickett rookie auto, which is pretty sick. That's probably that's probably one of my favorites. I mean, being a Browns fan, I'm not real big on the Steelers, but I guess I have to be because that card is worth more when he's good. So I guess I'm a Steelers fan now.
Well, it can be a good 15 of the 17 games, right? If not the last two. In school, do you have a favorite class?
I would say probably history or business classes. Those are probably my favorite.
I love history, so I always like when someone says history, I'd always like to know, is there a particular part of history that you particularly enjoy, either reading or just learning about? I
like learning about a little bit of everything. I like the war is what really sticks out to me. I'm kind of a war nerd. I like reading war books. It just really fascinates me.
And what does your future hold? What are you looking to do after you graduate?
I'm looking to go to business management as a major and looking to play college football.
And that's actually something interesting because obviously, again, because of the situation, you have this 1 year as a varsity player. How do you go about trying to either, let people know about yourself or in terms of your decision-making process to know a place that maybe you could go and be a factor on the football field? Because that's got to be one of the frustrating aspects. You haven't been able to put on the same kind of tape that maybe some other guys have.
Yeah, and it's definitely just about trying to get as much film, especially last year when he didn't have a varsity, just getting out good film. And some coaches have been really great about understanding that and really getting to know our situation, just understanding the whole process and just about getting good film out there. And at the end of the day, just sticking with the college that feels right and that appreciates your situation and, kind of understands it.
Let me ask that. You have that look like you better ask this question because I want to get back to this Friday because as a quarterback, you obviously have to take a close look at the opposing defense. And I've seen Wausau West every week because I broadcast the games. And this year's defense has been really good. I mean, obviously, especially up front. Yeah. As you've watched this defense, what has jumped out in terms of what you've seen on film in preparation for Friday's game?
Definitely. We know they're a great football team. We know their D line is probably the best D line we're going to play all year. They got big, fast, strong, physical dudes. They got fast dudes out there. They're not afraid to hit, and our offense, we just got to be ready for it. Can't get punched in the mouth early. We just got to be ready.
In terms of the atmosphere, because the law game is different, and especially because normally, and I would expect this year after not having the last 2 years, that they will be lined up around the track because we've seen that every time they go to a law game. How do you balance savoring that atmosphere, but yet focusing on what's happening between the lines?
Honestly, when I get out there, I really don't even notice a crowd. It's when you hear people cheering, like I can't really hear it. It's more of just a blur. I'm just so into the game and so focused on what's going on. I don't really get to see who's even there or how big the crowd is till either right before the game or right after it, and that's about it.
I know as the athletic director at Wausau West, I know there's a lot of things planned for this Friday night, being the last log game. There's a lot of stuff with the youth program, so all the flag football kids from both sides, the John Muir and Horseman, younger kids being involved. What would you tell those guys? Like, what do you want them to know about Wausau East football and Pacey Weber? And if you could go back to being a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grader, what do you want them to know about what it takes to get to where you're at now?
I guess what I would tell them is just stick with football. You're always going to have your ups and downs, but at the end of the day, just stick with it. Just trust the process, stay in the weight room, keep practicing, keep working hard every day, and if you do all those things, you will see results on the field.
Has this whole experience of having to fight for something, because you and your teammates have had to fight for this more than the average high school kid has this given you lessons that you're going to take for the rest of your life in terms of when you do find yourself maybe at crossroads at different aspects as you get into your adult life?
I mean, yeah, the work we've had to put in, and especially the work I've put in, like with football drills and stuff at home is immense. I know the stuff our dudes put in is immense. I know I'm going to take away a lot of life lessons from this. Just the hard work aspect. Gotta keep working hard. Gotta keep pushing myself all the time.
And finally, what is the feeling in the halls at East this week, and maybe even the last number of weeks, where the school has their football team back? I mean, that's got to be just cool. And what are the feelings you're getting from your classmates and friends in the halls at Wausau East?
There's definitely a lot of talk about the log game. Every day we're always talking about it. We're always watching film. We're always preparing for it because, I mean, we only got 2.5 hours to go out there and play the log game, and that'll be it. So we just got to go out there and have the best game we possibly can.
Jason, anything else?
Yeah, I just want to say congratulations, Pacey, on everything you've done to get to this point. Super proud of what you've done and what you guys have done, and looking forward to the game Friday night.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Pacey Weber, Wausau East Lumberjack quarterback, getting set to take on Wausau West in the log game, final log game coming up at Tom Field on Friday night. We'll take a break, come back, have more here on the, and finally, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me on.
I jumped right ahead. Thank you, Pacey Weber, again for being with us. We'll take a break, come back with more. It is the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. Again, thanks to Pacey Weber from Wausau East joining us real quickly on Friday night, as you just heard. Friday night, we have Marathon against Assumption live here on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO. I will be at Tom Field. We have a system here, and we're very fortunate this year to have live on the Wausau West Football YouTube page the video of the game along with my broadcast this season. So we basically have the Marathon games live on the radio when West is home. When West is on the road, we'll be live on the radio, but for fans, they can tune in with the YouTube on Wausau West Football on YouTube, and on Friday night, you'll be able to do that. So if you're not, number one, for the last log game, get out there. It's supposed to be a nice night. It's going to be a beautiful football night. And I think anybody here in Wausau that's a football fan should be at Tom Field for this final log game. But if you're not, if you're out of the area, you can tune in and catch my broadcast along with the video on the Wausau West Football YouTube page.
Which I've had a lot of compliments on, Chad, by the way, that putting the stream together with your voice, it's been a real positive.
Well, I can't make stuff up now. You know, it's like radio. Hey, whatever I say, it happened. You know,
Yeah.
no, I call it straight. But it was. I will say, because usually I will listen to my broadcast so I can learn something. You know, it was very different watching and hearing it. Because it is good film work, because you see what you miss.
Yep.
Because when I'm listening to it, I don't know if I missed something per se, and there I could. So I found it very cool, and I hope that folks are able to tune in again on the Wausau West Football YouTube page if they can't get out to the log game at Tom Field on a Friday night. But Pacey Weber, again, it's so much. We had a couple of my bosses came in this afternoon to pay a visit from our corporate office, and I was talking. I was saying, this is so much fun because again, these young people, to be able to sit down for 15 or 20 minutes or whatever it is, I can't, it's you just do it. And to let them to talk and to be able to learn about them and to learn about the stories, and especially for the Wausau East story, which is such a, it really is a great story that these kids, they had battled through. They could have easily given up the ship. As we heard from Coach Knapmiller, sometimes it's hard to have kids come out, and especially hard when you know that last year they didn't have varsity football. And I remember when I was in high school, every year seemed like it was such a long time. Nowadays, it goes by so quickly, but back then it was such a long time. The thought, it's going to be a full year before we get to play a varsity football game. And all those kids, they worked. And as you know, as a coach, have to be in the weight room to get better and to get stronger. And these young men for Wausau East High School really have earned the opportunity to be on the field at Tom Field on Friday for a big game.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of credit to go around. I think the administration at the time made a tough decision to go back to committing to 11-man football and biting the bullet and doing a JV season last year. I think that the coaching staff, there's a lot of new coaches. There's a lot of turnover there as well. I think that they played a huge role in what must have taken place this past offseason to get them back to this place. And then at the end of the day, none of it matters if you don't have the kids out to do it. And then it's one thing to come out for football. It's a whole nother thing to practice and compete and play football. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me is two things. One, they have 3 full 11-man teams and are fulfilling a full season of all 3 levels within the Valley Football Association, and not every team in the conference is doing that this year. Appleton West is having tons of problems, and then the fact that they're all competing. And I think what this group right now is building this year, and then next year they springboard into the Great Northern Conference. I think they're putting themselves in a great position to finish this year strong, and then next year kind of look to have a really nice season in the Great Northern.
And I guess finally, something you said in the break is this does have a different feel for the Wausau East football team as opposed to the last number of years when they were playing, where it felt like they were half in and half out. This group feels like they're all in, and you said, I think the big word is compete. They are competing every week.
Yeah, absolutely, and they have a lot to be proud of. I don't know at the end of the year that the record will kind of speak a little bit, but it won't tell the story of the season and how they got to where they're going to be. But lot to be proud of to this point, and a lot of football yet to be played for the Lumberjacks.
Let's talk about 8-player football from last weekend. It was week 2 of the season for the 8-player, and on Saturday it was at Newman Catholic High School in Balliet Field, where the Newman Cardinals dropped to 0-2 on the campaign, falling to a very good Florence team, 32-6. Quarterback Will Kelly for Florence had 18 rushes, 96 yards, was 6 of 8 passing, 90 yards, and a touchdown. Tyler Ackerman, the Cardinal quarterback, was 18 of 29 for 165 yards and threw 2 interceptions. Also had 19 rushes for 60 yards and a score. Carson Rice had 7 catches, 77 yards. Quincy Fender, 6 catches, 47 yards. And turnovers continued to be an issue early for the Cards. They had 3 turnovers to 0 for Florence, and also I'd call it a 4th turnover. They had a 4th down and 1 where they had a bad snap where they were deep in Florence territory. So basically it's an 8-0 turnover disadvantage for the Cardinals early. But something, again, we can touch on this. This is not a surprise, and it's also, I don't think, a disappointment at this point, because this is a team that was always going to be growing through the season. They lost every one of their starters. There's not a player in the position that they started in a year ago. They've lost their starting running back in week 1. They're going to grow. Coach Micklig and his group, they know what to do to get better as the season goes on. They played 2 very good crossovers. They're still a team that's going to be one to keep an eye on, but as you know, sometimes people go into the season, they're voting for these polls, which I will say every week are for entertainment purposes only and for clicks on websites. This is a Newman team that is going to grow, and I think again, you clean up the turnovers. It's hard to overcome -4 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, and very, very unfair to compare this team not only to last year, but the last 4 years, last 6 years of Newman Cardinal football. So yeah, it's a new team. It's a brand new team. for a minute there, Newman seemed to be a little bit in that Edgar Stratford where their names just kept popping up. Like how many Bates are there? How many? So you see the Ackerman names and those. So yeah, it's not a fair comparison. And much like some of these other schools that we're seeing who are kind of taking their lumps in those first 2 weeks against really strong non-conference opponents, I think the same can be said for Newman. I think that once this week when they get into that conference play and maybe some more even matchups for a young, inexperienced team, they're going to start to see some success and kind of hope to get that snowball going. And then maybe get on a nice little run here and come playoff time, maybe look back at some of these teams in the playoffs that maybe gave them a tough time early in the season and maybe have a better result.
And again, you don't win any trophies in August, do you?
Nope. Pete Susans used to say, as I spent time with him as a player at West, or not a hockey player, but he was my homeroom teacher, and then my daughter played hockey for him for the Storm. He always used to say, in hockey, football's a little different because you got to make the playoffs,
right? But
hockey's a little different. He always used to say it was a 22-game preseason. So that's kind of where they're at right now, is kind of learning some things, seeing where they're at.
Also in the central northern border crossovers, Marion Tigerton beat White Lake Elko 48-28. Braxton Gensko had 16 of 26 passing, 205 yards, 5 touchdowns. They had 23 rushes, 162 yards, and a score for Marion Tigerton. Port Edwards, I think a team that in this Central Conference with the Cardinals, they'll be coming to a Newman Catholic in just over a week, and they are 2-0 after defeating Niagara 58-2. I don't see that very often. 58-2. Port Edwards had 329 yards on 19 carries. Alman Bancroft, who took Florence to overtime in week 1, they're now 1-1, defeating Wabeno Leona 52-12. And Tri-County fell to North Central Michigan 42-6. But looking at the Central Conference, some of these teams Newman Catholic is facing, I think that both Port Edwards and Alman Bancroft have shown some signs that it's going to be a battle this year in that conference.
Yeah, it should be competitive, which I think is maybe a nice change of pace for all of them, to know that going into it, they all have a chance to compete for that championship.
And the CWC East, CWC West crossovers, and for entertainment purposes only, the number 1 ranked team in the state last week was Thorpe, and they lost to McDonald, the new, for entertainment purposes only, number 1 ranked team in the state this week. McDonald beat Thorpe 30-20. Thorpe actually led 20-6 at halftime. And then McDonald came back and outscored Thorpe 24-0 in the second half. Denzel Sutton, 114 yards passing, 104 yards rushing for Thorpe. Grant Smiskey, 14 of 20 passing, 227 yards. Dawson Moulton, 26 rushes for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns for McDonald. But again, we talked about the old Cloverwood Conference with the Abbotsford coach earlier. Those were 2 teams that used to be in the Cloverwood, now playing 8-player football. And those CWC conferences and 8-player have some really good squads. And those are 2, I think, that are still going to be heard from when we get to the postseason.
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing when we were looking at that northern border. It took me back a little bit to my days up at Northland Pines, when I see teams like Niagara, which used to be part of that really good northern elite team, and the Florence always had really strong teams, and the Leona Wabinos of the world, who all made up that Northern Lights or Northern Lakes Conference up there. So yeah, interesting to see where they've developed over the years.
And the other crossover saw some of those old Cloverwood teams very successful last week. Athens defeated Lake Holcomb 30-0 to improve to 2-0. Daxton Diethelm was 6 of 10 passing, 109 yards. Evan Pacell had 10 rushes for 56 yards and a score for Athens. Owen Withy goes to 2-0 after edging Prairie Farm by a score of 20-18. And Gilman is 2-0 after beating Bruce 50-12. Dawson Crezon, 4 of 6 passing for 115 yards, 3 touchdowns, 257 yards rushing on 32 attempts for Gilman. Greenwood, one of those old Cloverwood teams that are struggling so far this season. They were roughed up by New Auburn 64-0, and Alma Center Lincoln beat Cornell 74-0. But I think that when you look at some of those teams, and a few of those teams like Owen Withy, and I think it was Thorpe last year, were not in the postseason playoffs in 8-player. I think they are, again, that's one of the frustrating aspects about 8-player, because you have to know whether they have 200 kids in their school or not. But assuming that those schools are in the playoffs, it's going to be a much stronger 16-team, 8-player football field because of some of those old Cloverwood teams that are now banging heads in the CWC.
Yeah, those entertainment purpose only rankings are probably going to bounce around quite a bit as we go through the season.
We're going to take a break and then come back and look ahead to this coming week. Again, week number 4 in 11-player, week number 3 in 8-player. So we'll look ahead and see what are the best matchups coming up Thursday, Friday, maybe Saturday. I'm not sure. I can't remember if there are any Saturday games, but we will talk about week number 4 coming up here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. BullFallsRadio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. With former Wausau West head football coach Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes. Again, if you missed any of the program, if you joined us late, coming up a little bit after 8 o'clock, this will be posted on our website, BullFallsRadio.com. Click on sports and then click on the Big High School Sports Show. You'll be able to hear it in its entirety. You can also hear it wherever you get your podcast. So you don't have to be here live, but it's always good to tune in before the action begins. Don't listen after the action begins because then we look a little silly, saying the wrong things all the time. But we're going to look ahead now to week number 4. And again, when we look talking to Coach Knapmiller, he says it's been 6 weeks since practice started, and now we're going into week 4 of the season. I mean, we just got past Labor Day. We're just getting the school year underway. That's one of the things about football that's a little unusual in terms of starting the season off before school starts. But you do sense an energy now where the kids are back in school, where the student body will be behind it, and it really kind of feels like, after it's the excitement of the start of a new season, now you got that excitement of everybody that's a shareholder within the programs are part of it and now trying to will their teams forward.
Yeah, high school athletics are great across the board, but there's something special about Friday night football and the role it plays in starting your school off to a good year, like the role it plays in homecoming, the role it plays in getting. I mean, last week at Rapids, I think there was over 100 plus West students at that game, and
I think that was one of the bigger student sections I can recall on the road for Wausau West, and they had those flashing lights at one point. But I was very impressed with how many kids for a game that was still in August.
Yeah, and I think that's across the board. I think people are some are more excited to be back in school than others, but definitely football plays a role in getting the school year off to the right step.
And I'm going to correct my mistake before anyone calls on it. It was September 1st, so I guess it was September, not August. September 1st. So. But still, I was very impressed with how many Wausau West students were in the bleachers at Southwood County Stadium last Friday night. Well, let's look ahead, and I think I'm glad I got a seat in the press box because I do think that it's going to be a great crowd at Tom Field on Friday night. Should be great football weather. And it's before talking about the game, again, it is the final log game, and there's something that's exceptionally bittersweet about that because, I mean, you've been part of so many of these games, both in terms of playing and coaching. I've seen a lot of these games going back a number of years. And number one, it's great it's back at least one more time because it would have been a shame not to have at least one more log game before the merger of East and West. And number two, it's just a special night. If you've been to Tom Field, you see the crowds on both sides of the field because it's very rare for a normal game where you see all the visiting bleachers filled. You see almost the entirety or sometimes the entirety of the home bleachers filled, and then you see all these people around the fence, around the field. It is quite an environment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the, I think, a little biased, obviously, but I think it's one of the best rivalry games in the state of Wisconsin. Been going on. This will be the 54th version of it. The records are currently 35 wins for the Warriors, 17 for the Lumberjacks, and the one tie mixed in there. But a couple other things about the game Friday night. It is the last one. We're encouraging anybody who to be there, as many people as possible, obviously. But we're going to recognize at the end of the first quarter, we're going to have people stand up. Anybody who's ever at the game, who's ever played in a log, played or coached in a log game. So it'll be really neat to see all those people stand up. And then in addition to have all of the youth players there, both to be there to support the Warriors and the Lumberjacks one last time, but then also to get a glimpse of what it might look like when we restructure in the fall of 2025, when these kids start playing together on the same team. So kind of an exciting night for a lot of different reasons. And let's not forget, it's a week 2 of the conference football game and decent matchup. And I think if you just look at it from an X's and O's standpoint and a record standpoint, I would have to think that the Warriors probably would be the favorite in this one.
Well, it looks as though, and again, I think, we've talked about East and kids like Pacey Weber and others, who they got some good athletes. They have the basketball players and the multi-sport guys who are good athletes. But, boy, Wausau West is so good on the defensive front. I mean, Landon Thompson, DeAndre Bournes, Will Mitchell, their linebackers. That's going to be a handful for the Lumberjacks. I think they're going to have to find ways. They're not going to be able to hold on to the football a lot, are they, up front? Yeah. Because it's going to be very tough to keep those players from the backfield. Yeah,
you also have Bryce Jaworski on the defensive line. And then you look on the other side of the ball, and you have Austin Sorensen and Tegan Isham-Her and Will McCorrison and the big bodies up front. Forget about log game or East versus West and all those other things. It's a high school football game or any level football game, and little cliche, it's won in the trenches, but it really comes down to blocking and tackling, and I would say that's probably where West has the advantage, and this one is at the line of scrimmage.
Also in the WVC, over at Steam Stadium, another game here in the Wausau metro area on Friday night. We should have Everest on the road for log night, but no, the lights will be on at Steam Stadium on Friday night, and it's, again, one of those traditional rivalries because, you and I have been around here long enough where, back when Marshfield and DC Everest would be the game for the conference championship, the games that would be in the postseason playoffs, Len Lutke and Wayne Steffenhagen. In fact, the reason that there is, I think, artificial turf at DC Everest is because of a mud game in the playoffs played between the Tigers and the DC Everest Evergreens. DC Everest off to a 3-0 start, but Marshfield tied with them at 1-0 in the conference despite being 1-2.
Yeah, I think Everest is well-earned 3-0, but at the same time, maybe not as tested as some of the other teams out there, having Appleton West last week and Green Bay to start the year. So I think Marshfield's looking to prove something, and as is Everest. I think Everest's looking to say, hey, we are on the top of this conference where we belong, and Marshfield's looking to get those wins they need to get back to that spot and make it back into the playoffs.
And, there's got to have another rivalry game. It's rivalry night in the VFC. So Wisconsin Rapids Lincoln Red Raiders try to get their first win against Stevens Point team that is riding high after 2 very impressive wins. The old River Jug game being played at Gerke Field this week. For Wisconsin Rapids, they did some good things against West last week. I thought they started to run the ball a little bit better than they did the first 2 weeks. Defensively, they played some solid football. But Stevens Point right now, it looks like they got a good running game. They're starting to get a little bit more yardage passing-wise, and you have to be impressed with what they did defensively last week at Hortonville.
Yeah, for sure. I think you definitely look at this one and you would give Spash the edge coming in, but this seems to be a game year in and year out where when the game's over, you either look for you doing the conference update scores on your Twitter feed or watching the news after the game, and it seems like more often than not, I'm surprised by the outcome of this game. Rivalry game, both really traditional, strong programs, and I don't know, Coach Biola does as the year goes on, he starts playing some guys both ways and finding a way to do some things different that you're not ready for. So it should be a good rivalry matchup.
Hortonville tried to bounce back after their loss to Stevens Point at Appleton West. And again, you feel for the folks at Appleton West. You got such good programs in that area you're battling, and it's just tough. When you're down, you tend to be even further down because there's such good programs right now in the Fox Valley. But for Hortonville, I imagine they want to try to get some offense going. This season so far, they have not been really able to get a lot of offense because obviously they got a defense that is pretty solid.
Yeah, this might be just what the doctor ordered for the Hortonville offense this week. But I'll say this: one of the things when you're trying to build a program, and who knows, maybe Appleton East or Wausau East becomes the blueprint for Appleton West when they look to turn it around. But one of the things is getting a head coach in there who's going to stay there and to be stable, because turning a program around is really a process, probably a 5-year process. And if you just keep starting over year after year, which is kind of what they've done the last few years, it's really hard to get your footing and move forward.
Great Northern Conference, Mosinee back home. So if you're in the southern part of the listening area, you can go to Mosinee as well as they take on Ashland. Obviously, Mosinee, they got a little bloody nose in week 1 against Stratford. They bounced back nicely, and I think last week was the first time that they kind of looked like Mosinee offensively. Even in the win in week number 2, you didn't see the same kind of numbers that we've seen throwing the football. That's been a Mosinee tradition going back to Novinsky, but it looked like more Mosinee-esque last week, and plus they shut out Lakeland as well.
Yeah, I think Ashland is probably towards the bottom of the GNC, which will probably prove well for Mosinee this week. And I think it'll be interesting to see in these other matchups, and as the season goes on, how much really good defense is there in the GNC, or is it just potentially some poor offenses?
And speaking of which, I mean, could it be first score wins at J Stadium in Merrill on Friday night? Because both teams have struggled offensively. Amtigo is at Merrill, and when you look at this game, it's, both teams lost their first GNC game last week. If you want to make the playoffs, and you both, know that Mosinee is still ahead in their schedule and some other tough games, this is one of those games you got to have.
Yeah, another. I would say what these two would consider a nice rivalry game, being old
war on 64.
Yeah, the old WV Wisconsin Valley Conference matchups, the GNC, and
a lot of Schofield ties for both schools.
Yes, there is. So yeah, this will be a fun one to kind of look at the final score on after our game Friday night and see who won.
Lakeland trying to get that offense going. Travel to Medford, and this is a rematch of a playoff game from a year ago. But right now, Lakeland has a lot of work to do, though. They're kind of in the same spot they were a year ago, but you have to be concerned because of the lack of offense for the T-Birds. And for the Medford Raiders, what are we going to see? I mean, obviously, you can't say the offense was poor last week because they did have so many yards on the ground and more than 400 yards total offense, but I'm sure they would like to be able to finish a little bit better than they did in that 12-0 win at Merrill.
Yeah, I'm sure they're amping up and trying to get as much on film as possible, score more points, and getting ready for that eventual battle with Mosinee.
Also, Hayward and Rhinelander. Who would have thunk it? Who would have thunk it before the season? 3-0 versus 3-0. I mean, you talk about, somebody's going to be 4-0. A big surprise.
This might be my game of the week that I'm kind of looking forward to see how this one plays out. Not knowing very little about Hayward, right, and knowing that Rhinelander seems to be maybe back to where they were a couple years ago in the GNC. So this will kind of, I think, tell who's going to rise and who's going to rise to the top half and sink to the bottom half.
Merrillwood CWC small crossovers, the Marathon Red Raiders, in a game that will be broadcast live right here on Bull Falls Radio, hosting the Assumption Royals again with these crossovers. The Merrillwood has been dominant, but this is one that, last season Assumption beat Marathon. A couple of years ago, Marathon beat Assumption. But for Marathon, a great opportunity to go to 2-0 in the conference and, again, give that little cushion going into a very difficult Merrillwood conference campaign. And for Assumption, somehow find a way to slow down the opposing offense in the first half after giving up 107 points combined the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think for Marathon, this is a challenge to make sure your kids are ready and not just assume they're going to come in and do the same thing that's happened 2 weeks in a row. And I think I definitely reiterate what you said. Like, these are really important wins for those teams who are kind of middle to the bottom of that Merrywood. You got to get them when you can.
And the first home game of the season for Marathon as well. It's always odd sometimes, those schedules, the quirks of the schedule. Abbotsford and Iola Scandinavia. And we talked to Coach Knapmiller earlier. And I think this is a very intriguing matchup. I think Iola Scandinavia is, at this point, the preseason favorite in the CWC Small. Their 2 losses against quality competition. They did battle, I thought, Colby last week. And Abbotsford 3-0. The run game has looked exceptionally good. But as we talked about, for Abbotsford, you're 3-0 and 1-0 in the conference. It's almost still a must-win game. You don't want to be 1-1 going into the Merrillwood portion of the schedule.
Yeah, I think obviously he will rely on his run game to get a nice win here against Iola Scandinavia, and what a feather it would be in the cap of Iola Scandinavia to steal one from the Marywood.
And frankly, when you look at the rest of the Marywood CWC small crossovers, it's going to be a tough sledding for the CWC small. You got Colby, obviously, is so good at Loyal. You got Pittsville at home against Pacelli. Rochelle at Edgar. You kind of cringe when you see that one right now. And then Auburndale already gets a forfeit because they get the forfeit against Wild Rose. They do get the substitute opponent, O'Connell Falls. But again, it looks like a pretty good opportunity for these Marywood schools to go to 2-0 going into the conference proper.
Yeah, that's kind of what stuck out after this week is that everyone's 1-0, and aside from the Abbotsford, Iola Scandinavia, I would say we're probably looking at 2-0 next week.
And frankly, when you look at the CWC large, you have what you call the top four and then the bottom four teams. And unfortunately, none of the top four teams are playing each other this week. You got Wittenberg-Burnhamwood, who's been so good, facing a struggling Spencer Columbus. You got Stratford, who looks like they re-steadied the ship. But, I mean, Stratford's played three really good opponents to start off the season, so obviously they are jumping right into the deep end. But they're back home against Manawa. Amherst will try to get back on the winning track at Shiocton, who has been struggling. Again, they lost so much from their good team from a year ago. And Wyowega Fremont, I put Shiocton down twice. One of these teams plays Nakusa. But either way, it's going to be difficult. I think, again, Whitburn, Stratford, Amherst, Wyowega Fremont, pretty big favorites in all these games.
Yeah, there should be some really nice matchups the following week when these large schools start playing each other. Yeah.
8-player, there's the third week of crossovers before the actual conference season, but in 8-player, all these games count. There's not a case where these don't affect playoff opportunities. You got to win these crossover games. Newman Catholic takes on Wabeno Leona, a game that will be heard live on bullfallsradio.com and also on the Civic Media app on Sports Stream 2 on Friday night at 6:40 for the pregame. For the Cards, I mean, first time in a long time, must win. You got to try to get that first win. Wabeno had a rough go of it last week against Alman Bancroft, but they were a playoff team that won in the playoffs a year ago. And again, a trek for the Cards. First Friday night lights game, maybe a good thing for the Cardinals. Get on the bus and try to get that first win.
Yeah, I think probably an interesting week of practice for Coach Micklig. Hasn't been in those shoes for quite a few years, and I think they'll probably be hungry and look to get in that win column.
Some other games in these crossovers: Niagara at Alman Bancroft. Again, Alman Bancroft been pretty impressive early this season. Another, I think, a very interesting game is Port Edwards home against Three Lakes. Three Lakes is a team expected to battle Florence in the northern border. Port Edwards has been impressive so far as well. Tri-County is at Florence and Menominee Indian at Marion Tigerton. But I think that Port Edwards Three Lakes game will be very interesting to keep an eye on, because if Port is able to beat Three Lakes, that would put a sort of a marker in the sand with what has been Newman's conference, that maybe there will be a battle at the top of that league.
Yeah, I think that all of those matchups, I think kind of like we said earlier, I think the polls will show, and even within these conferences, I think that's a really good thing for 8-player football to kind of balance the playing field a little bit and get some matchups.
And finally, the CWC crossovers. Athens will look to go to 3-0, hosting Bruce. Interesting game. As for entertainment purposes, number 1 ranked McDonald Max will be at Owen Withy for an old Cloverwood matchup. You got Thorpe looking to stay undefeated at home against New Auburn. Gilman always good at Cornell. Prairie Farm at struggling Greenwood, and Alma Center Lincoln against Lake Holcomb. So as we got 30 seconds to go, any final thoughts?
No, I think it's exciting being here where we're at in the conference and kind of starting to see after week 2, I think the separation will start to happen. So some good matchups this week, and looking forward to about 10:30 tomorrow night to see how they ended up.
Thanks to Jacob Knapmiller, the Abbotsford coach, and to Pacey Weber, the Wausau East quarterback, for joining us here today. And thanks to Jason Foster for being across the way as well. We'll be back next week from 6 until 8 p.m. Another edition of the Big High School Sports Show here on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, and the Civic Media app.